Happy election day, sixth graders. Wow, today is going to be a nutso day. You are going to be swamped by messaging, by people talking about really important issues. Here's what I would say. We got a lot going on. We got COVID. We got an election that's really tense. Here's the thing. We are also studying community in sixth grade, right? And that's the antidote to everything. Antidote meaning the answer, the cure. Not even the cure. You know how like you get a rash and like sometimes it's just really, really, really harsh and you put some salve or like a cream on it and it maybe doesn't even make it go away, but it makes it feel better. That's what community does. We still are working to fix things and community doesn't necessarily fix anything. Sometimes it just covers it over with a salve or a cream. But in the end, it helps us get to a place where we can fix things. Community is about togetherness and warmth shared by each other. So community, that's why we're studying in sixth grade, is that it's never been more important. This is the time, right, where we got to come together, and we do have differences and we got to figure those out, and we've got to fix some very broken things with our system. But say hi to everyone you can today. Ask people how they're doing and listen. And then when they ask back, be honest. Don't sugarcoat it. Be real. So community. All right. Today is Nora. So there's Nora. That's her today. We're just going to do one chapter. Just going to let you catch up a little bit. Some of you are struggling a little bit, and that's okay. You're fighting through it, but another chapter. So here we go. Nora. I always try to get Mr. Miles out for a walk and a taste of fresh air. I don't know about his other nurses. I expect that it's because I'm British. Back in England, you see, mothers pushing infants in prams through winter gales. A pram is a buggy, like a baby buggy, like a stroller. I expect as well it was the sight of my own father vegetating in his chair by the fire. We mustn't stop living before our time. So I'm forever telling Mr. Miles. It was a midsummer morning, and I was pushing his wheelchair up Gibb Street, a new route for us. And I guess if you guys haven't figured out, Gibb Street is the name of the street where the garden is. Gibb Street in Cleveland. The view, I'll admit, is less than uplifting. Half the storefronts seem to be empty. Mr. Miles must remember a very different scene. His landlady says he's lived here many years. As he's lost his speech with his second stroke, he can't tell me himself. He's a mystery. Lately, his interest in the world had declined. I'd stop before a store window to let him see himself. He has the dignified head of an African chief, only to find that he'd fallen asleep. I should tell you a little bit about him. So here's how she described him. She didn't say he's black. She said he's got the dignified head of an African chief. So she's in her own way, this is wonderful, without just saying he's a black man. She's describing him, so the author is showing you that Mr. Miles is black. I realized that his time might be near, and then, that morning, rolling along the sidewalk, suddenly his arm came up. So when she said his time may be near, what do you think she's talking about? His time to die, right? She's a caregiver. She's a nurse who's an in-home care. He wanted to stop. I obliged him at once. To our left was a lot in which a few bold pioneers had planted gardens. We remained several minutes watching two Asian women hoeing, then continued on. Immediately, back up went his arm. I came around and looked at him. He twisted and pointed toward the garden. I turned the wheelchair and headed back. I could see his nostrils taking in the smell of the soil. We reached the lot. His arm commanded me to enter. Over the narrow, bumpy path we went, his nose and eyes working. Some remembered scent was pulling him. He was a salmon traveling upstream through his past. You guys don't understand this, but if you know anything about salmon in the wild, they actually swim upstream. They go against the river current to spawn, to lay their eggs. So it's kind of a natural thing. So she's talking about how he's working against the current now, trying to get to someplace. That first day, we simply watched the others. We might have been strolling through a miniature city. Some plots sported brick pathways and flower borders, while others looked haphazard. That means like messy. So guys, we're now at the point where some people have been like putting landscaping in on their garden. Like they're building it out to be like a personal space. So this place is really grown. One had a gate that was in fact a car door. Within, beans climbed a propped-up set of bed springs, a hummingbird feeder, a barbecue grill, a gardening hat hanging from a nail. There were many such domestic touches. I was entranced. I determined that Mr. Miles should do more than simply watch, wheelchair or no. I worked on the problem in my head. 2 days later, driving to his apartment, I stopped at the garden and loaded a large plastic trash barrel and a shovel. I wheeled him up an hour later, used my pocket knife to cut holes in the bottom of the barrel for drainage, and built up a fine sweat shoveling in dirt. I'd brought me a, it, I'd brought with me a dozen seed packets. Mr. Miles chose the flowers decisively, ignoring the vegetables. Was he recalling his mother's flower garden? His history was unknowable. I pushed him as close to the barrel as I could. 30 minutes later, he'd planted hollyhocks, pop pies, oh, sorry, hollyhocks, poppies, and snapdragons. Riding home afterward, he smelled the dirt on his fingers with satisfaction. You guys ever smell like earth, dirt? It's kind of cool. That small circle of earth became a second home to both of us. Gardening boring? Never! It has suspense, tragedy, startling developments, a soap opera growing out of the ground. I'd forgotten that tremolo of expectation produced by a tiny forest of sprouts. Tremolo is like that trembling, like suspense, like what's going to happen? What a marvelous sight it was to behold Mr. Miles' furrowed black face inspecting his smooth-skinned young. Just arrived in the world he'd shortly leave. His eyes gained back some of their life. He weeded and watered with great concentration. A fact bobbed up from my memory that the ancient Egyptians prescribed walking through a garden as a cure for the mad, mad being crazy. It was a mind-altering drug we took daily. We were rather alone there, off to one side. Our most common visitors were the cats. They were attracted by the aroma of fish, the work of a child who'd copied the pilgrims of old and buried sardines with her seeds. Then our solitary status ended as a result of a downpour. A child planting seeds. I wonder who that might be. Then our solitary status ended as a result of a downpour. When the rain came that day, the other gardeners all ran in the same direction, as if in a fire drill. We followed and found them sheltered beneath the shoe store's overhang 2 doors down, apparently their customary refuge. The small, dry space forced us together. In 15 minutes, we'd met them all and soon knew the whole band of regulars. Most were old. Many grew plants from their native lands. Huge Chinese melons, ginger, cilantro, a green the Jamaicans call kalaloo, and many more. Pantomime was often required to get over language barriers. Pantomime is like, using your hands to if you can't speak a person's language, sometimes you make symbols, right? Yet we were all subject to the same weather and pests, the same neighborhood, and the same parental emotions towards our plants. If we happened to miss 2 or 3 days, people stopped by on our return to ask about Mr. Miles' health. We, like our seeds, were now planted in the garden. I told all this to out-of-town guests, then took them up Terminal Tower. We got off at the observation deck on the 42nd floor to find that the garden, which loomed so large to its tenders, was hopelessly hidden from view by buildings. I looked at all the tourists who no notion it existed, who thought they were seeing all of Cleveland, and restrained myself from pointing and shouting, "The Gibb Street Garden is there!" So she didn't really feel like announcing it, but she wanted to because it was important to her. All right, so there we go. Hey, this is really getting to the point where the garden is growing. So today, in your work, I want you to do one more sketch of where do you think people are. So again, you got to think about where people are. Are they on the corner? Are they in the sidewalk? Remember, there's buildings on 3 sides, and there's there's a lot of description of where people are, but it's not too much. So you got to infer. So you got to visualize. This is hard, and it's going to be challenging, and you may not be right, but you better have a reason why you think stuff goes where it goes. All right, so let's get to your work, and we'll see you later.